Hello book lovers, and welcome back or welcome to Nakat's Bookish Cafe. Today I am here to do a book unhaul. Alright guys, so I usually do about one book unhaul a year. I don't have too many books, so I usually don't unhaul too frequently, otherwise my shelves will be barren for most of the year. They're definitely a lot emptier now because I am getting rid of about 38 books this year, and I am very excited to get them off of my shelf, especially as I start to kind of think about next year's content. It's always nice to just have nice, fresh, clean shelves full of only books that you're really interested in reading and books that you have really loved reading. So that being said, about 10 of these books are books that I have not read yet, and the rest of them are all books that I have read and just didn't love enough to keep, or maybe I just have outgrown them a little bit or feel like other people can benefit from them the most. I am pretty good about cleaning out my shelves. I really have a desire to have shelves that really reflect my taste in reading, and that just means getting rid of books that are meh in my opinion, so that they can go find homes that love them more than I ever could. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the books that I have not read yet, and then we'll jump into the books that I have read. So let's go ahead and start with a 3-for-1 deal, and we have 3 Anne Price books. We have Interview with a Vampire, and then we have Prince Lestat, which is the second book to that, and then we also have Pandora by this author. Now, I have never, well, that's a lie. I have read a few pages of an Anne Rice book and very quickly DNF'd it. It just wasn't for me, and I have to admit that has played into me hesitating to pick up any more books by her. And as another fall season is approaching and I'm realizing that I probably will once again not get to these well-beloved vampire books, I just have to realize that I will probably never get to them. If I do, maybe I'll listen to the audiobook, but the physical copies just don't need to be on my shelf anymore. As far as Pandora, I don't even know what this book is about. It was sitting around in our garage, and I figured I'd take a hold of it just in case I really did like Anne Rice's writing, but at this point, they are just taking up a shelf. They've never been on a TBR. I've never even considered putting them on a TBR. So it is a time for them to find a new home. Considering they're not in the best condition, all of these books are used. They will probably find their home in a little free library. Up next, we have Seduced by the Highlander by Julian McLean. This is one of the few mass paperback romances that kind of survived my first unhaul last year. What kept me interesting was the fact that it seems to involve a sex curse, and I was like, that kind of sounds like a silly goofy time. But I just don't read a lot of historical romances, and when I do, I read more of the ones that are coming out nowadays, more queer leaning than this as well. So I just have a feeling I will never get to it, so someone else can have fun with this sex curse situation. Another mass paperback for the romance genre. We have a book that includes 2 short stories. These are, I think, both set around Christmas time. It's called A Christmas Bride and Christmas Beau. Those are the 2 stories in here by Mary Balog. I don't know how to pronounce her name. I don't read a lot of like super holiday based books, especially Christmas ones, so I just know I'm never gonna get to this, and maybe someone else can have some fun reading it around the Christmas season. Up next, we have a book that I pulled out of the free little library. I figured that it was always good to have a fun little middle grade on my shelf just in case I needed it for a quick readathon prompt, but you know, it's been a couple years on my shelf and I figured I haven't picked it up yet, so I should throw it back into the free little library so one of the kids in my neighborhood can enjoy it. It is called Pipa Park, Crush at First Sight by Erin Yoon. It just seems like a middle grade story about a girl who's attending a new school, and I don't know if there's like a bit of a love triangle where she's got a couple guys she's crushing on. It sounded like it would be a cute time, but I have plenty of other books on my shelf that I will always prioritize over this. Up next we have And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. This was a book that I picked up at Half Price Books because I felt like there were so many thrillers in this day and age that are inspired by this story that I should read the original text, but I feel like I'm familiar enough with the concept that there's really no reason for me to read it. I have read only one Agatha Christie book, and that was The Murder on the Orient Express. Full-blown mysteries are not really my thing. I am just too terrible with names for me to be able to keep track of who said what about who. Like, my brain literally cannot handle it unless I get out like a sketch pad and start like writing down names and characteristics, which I don't want to do. So I don't think Agatha Christie or even like mystery novels are fully my thing. So I'm just gonna throw this back into the free little library world. Up next, we have two non-fictions that I just know I'm never gonna get to. The first one is The Ethics of Invention, Technology in the Human Future by Sheila Jasanoff. This was actually a textbook of my sister's that was lounging around in our garage. I picked it up a couple years ago, 2-3 years ago, and just realized I'm not a big technology person. I don't know how technology based this is going to be, but I'm sure it'll be over my head and outside of my range of interest. So we are going to go ahead and get rid of it. The other one was a gift from a family member, so I feel a little bad getting rid of it without having tried it, but it is a self-help book. Self-help books aren't really my jam. This is Everything You Need You Have: How to Be at Home in Yourself by Jared Kitt. So once again, I'm not a big self-help person. I'm going to therapy for that, so I don't need a book for it. I'm paying a therapist to help me. So I'm just gonna go ahead and pass this on, and hopefully someone gets something good out of it. And the final book in the unread pile is not 100% unread. It is Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed. This was actually a book that I started via audiobook and then kind of put down and was like, maybe I want to read this book physically. And then that year, a family member had sent us a big box of used books that she was unhauling, and this was one of them. So I was like, perfect. And then it proceeded to sit on my shelves for a couple years, and I never had the desire to pick it up again. So I am gonna say officially that this is no longer a temporary DNF and is in fact a permanent, full-blown DNF. All right, guys, moving into the books that I have actually read. I have gone ahead and taken my jacket off because it is getting a little bit toasty. The fall weather is not quite here yet. But the first book on my list is going to be Bloom by Delilah Dawson. This is kind of a sapphic, cozy horror story, very short. I did enjoy the writing, but I really struggled with the pacing of the story. I thought that it was just too consistent throughout the entirety of the story, and me and my horror, I like there to be definitely an escalation towards the end of the story to kind of like increase my heart rate a little bit, and that did not happen. So this is definitely a book that a lot of people seem to love, but it unfortunately left me rather disappointed. So I'm gonna go ahead and pass it on to someone else who may love it more than I did. Up next, this may be slightly surprising to see, but I actually have two TJ Klune books here. We have The House in the Cerulean Sea and In the Lives of Puppets. In the Lives of Puppets, I would say, is definitely my least favorite TJ Klune book. This was kind of Pinocchio inspired. I had actually just recently last month read Withered and Sear, which is one of his older books, and he had a robot character in there that made a lot of Pinocchio references. So I can tell that this is definitely a story he wanted to write for a long time. I'm glad he had the chance to write it and share it with the world. it just wasn't for me. On the other hand, we have one of his most popular books, which is The House in the Cerulean Sea. I believe the second book just recently came out either this month or last month, and I enjoyed this book. I had a good time with it. Unfortunately, this book has some controversy around it due to it being inspired by the 60s sweep, which is a traumatic event that happened to the indigenous community here in America and also in Canada, I believe. So it wasn't really TJ Klune's place to write that story. So there were definitely some people that were hurt by that. And so I decided that I was not going to continue to support this specific book or this specific series. Obviously, we all make our own choices on what we want to do when we hear an author did something maybe they shouldn't. I obviously am going to continue to talk highly about TJ Klune. I decided just this series is going to be taking a step back from my channel. Some people may continue to read this book and the second book. No judgment here. I am just informing you about some of the things that are being said about this specific book, and you can make your decisions based off of that. Up next, we have A Lesson in Vengeance by Victoria Lee. This is a book I feel I enjoyed more than a lot of people did. It's kind of a sapphic, dark academia, witchy story, but I did not like it as much as her Fever King duology. So it was a slight disappointment to me, and I just don't feel a strong desire to keep this book on my shelf. And I'll go ahead and pass it on to someone who is looking for those darker sapphic vibes that this story provides. Up next, we have a book that I recently showcased in a vlog where I was reading a bunch of queer superhero books. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. I was really pleasantly surprised by it, despite it being a older book. It is a young adult story. It is a story that TJ Klune said he really enjoyed and kind of inspired his Extraordinaries series, and so that's why I decided to pick it up. I'm definitely glad that I read it, but I'm just never gonna return to the story. I think some of the things, you know, references to like women and stuff were a little bit outdated, but I do at the same time think there is some important themes in here that a younger audience would really benefit from. So I'm more than happy to go ahead and send this back out into the world. Up next, we have a YA series that I really loved as a teenager, and that is the Flame in the Mist duology by Renee Ahdieh. This was a series I had a lot of fun with when I myself was a younger woman. Unfortunately, the last 2 times I tried to read a book by this author, I DNF'd them relatively quickly, so I just know that I have outgrown this author and her writing, but I do think that this is a really fun duology. It's your classic enemies to lovers kind of situation, and I'm sure that someone else will come across these and have a lot of fun with them. Up next, we have here The Whole Time by Victor Martins, and this was another book that I had a good time with while I was reading it, but it is definitely on the younger side of the YA genre, so it's not something I will be revisiting or something that I will most likely suggest on my channel. This does have queer representation, Hispanic representation, plus size representation, so it's definitely got some good stuff in it, which is why I'm so excited to go ahead and get this into someone else's hands. Up next is a book that has survived a few unhauls. It's just had a really, I don't know, like a nostalgic feel to it, but I think I'm kind of like moving away from that nostalgic feeling, and I am officially ready to pass this book on, and that is My Life as Emperor by Sue Tong. This is a book that when I was reading it, gave me like the strongest sense of deja vu that I have ever felt in my life. For all I know, I have read this book twice in my entire life, or maybe I only read it once. I don't know, but there are still like scenes in this book that I remember, but I also know that at this point I have read other books that have done what this book has done, but slightly better, so there's no longer a need for me to hold on to it. Up next, we have Sweetest Remedy by Jane Igaro. This is a book that I read during a 24-hour, or was it 48-hour? It was probably 48-hour readathon vlog that does does mean I read this book relatively quickly, and maybe that's why it just hasn't really stuck with me. I thought it was a good time, quick, easy read. I enjoyed the family dynamics presented as well as the romance, but overall it was kind of just another contemporary romance. Didn't do anything super crazy or memorable, so I'm gonna go ahead and pass it on. Up next we have Don Quixote by Cervantes, and this was a book that was on my challenge list to read this year, and I DNF'd it after about 10 pages. I just was not interested in the story. I just knew that I was not going to have a good time reading 900 pages of a clueless man who had no idea about what was going on around him. I was just like, I see plenty of that on the internet or even on the debate stage, so I don't need to read it in a book. Also, the quality of this book is crap. I feel like so many people collect these editions, but I only read 10 pages. Like, how have I only read 10 pages and this book is literally falling apart at the seams? So not the best quality either, so this will definitely be going into a free little library because I can hardly ask money for it. Up next we have another trilogy from my youth, the first of them being called The Valiant, the second being called The Defiant, and the third, if I can get my hands on it, is called The Triumphant. So this was kind of like a female gladiator situation. I had a lot of fun with the series. I remember the third book had this one scene that made me sob my eyes out, but at the same time I've obviously outgrown it, and I didn't read it at a young enough age where I have any feelings of like nostalgia like the Hunger Games or the Matched series. So I feel like I can go ahead and pass these on and help some other young women feel some girl power through these stories. Up next we had a huge disappointment, and that is Angels Before Men by Raphael Nicholas. This book to this day still has one of the most gorgeous covers I have ever seen. I really need to see about getting the art print copy of this because I do want this beautiful work of art in my life. I just could not deal with the writing style. This was kind of a queer retelling of the Fall of Lucifer, and the writing style I think is more for those who really enjoy reading classics or even like scripture. So it really wasn't my cup of tea, but wow, what a stunner. So very disappointed. This is definitely one of the hardest books to get rid of. Up next we have another book that is very beautiful, and therefore I was reluctant to get rid of it. It actually survived an unhaul last year despite the fact that I knew I had to get rid of it. There was no reason for me to hold on to it, and that is The Last Quintista by Donna Barra Higuera. This is a middle grade sci-fi story, one of those humanity needed to go ahead and escape planet Earth due to probably climate change or something along those lines, and our character kind of wakes up before everyone else and realizes something weird is going on. So it was just a little too middle grade for me, a little too surface level in my opinion. So I am sure that if someone who is actually a middle grade person picks this up, they will have a great time with it. Up next we have a book that was sent to me by a subscriber. I always hate getting rid of books that were gifted to me, but this person gifted me 3 books and I'm keeping 2 out of 3, so I'm trying to like not feel too bad about it. And that is going to be Finding Joy by Adriana Herrera. This was a book I believe I gave like 3.5 stars. It was one of those books I had a really great time with. It was fun, it was sweet, it was set in Ethiopia, which is not a setting I see very often in my stories, but at this point I have read quite a few male romances, so it just takes a little bit more for me to be impressed. Also, I'm not the biggest fan of insta love, and that was definitely present in the story, but just based off of all the diversity and the diverse setting in the story, I'm really glad to go ahead and send this out into the world for someone else to enjoy and love. Up next, there is a book you may be a little surprised to see, especially because after I finished it, I said, yes, I'm a little disappointed by it, but I feel like it might be a me thing, and so I will reread it someday. I have decided I'm not going to reread it. It's not a me thing. A lot of people seem to be kind of disappointed by it, which is a bummer, especially since it's Where Sleeping Girls Lie by Faraday at Becky and Mehdi. As you may see, her other book is sitting on my favorite shelf, and now I'm unhauling a book by her. But this book was just so bland in comparison to their first book. It really was a massive letdown, and because it's kind of a mystery thriller situation, I don't see any use in me rereading this story. I do like me kind of a dark academia horror YA story, which is what this is, but it just, in my opinion, didn't go quite far enough. I do think it has some really good commentary on it, especially when it comes to the disappearance of Black girls and when it comes to the way that sexual assault is treated or handled on school grounds. But otherwise, it it left me very, very disappointed, and I think it left a lot of other people disappointed as well. All right, up next we have Never Whistle at Night, which is an anthology of dark fiction by a bunch of different Indigenous authors. I gave the stories overall a 3.5 star rating. There was only one short story in here that got a 5 star, and there was even a 1 star and quite a few 2.5 stars. So I just am not the biggest short story collection girly. I was kind of thinking that this would work better for me because it's a dark fiction horror, and I do enjoy short stories of that, but I'm starting to think that when I say short story, I mean like 150 to 250 pages and not 10 pages. So these were just a little too short and constantly left me unsatisfied, but it is by a group of Indigenous authors. It would be great if someone else picked these up, fell in love with some of these authors. A lot of these are already on my TBR with their full-length novels that I will definitely be checking out, but of course spreading the love for our Indigenous authors to my local community. Up next, we have a book from an author that I really do enjoy, and that is going to be Work For It by Talia Hibbert. I've had a great time with quite a few of Talia Hibbert's books. This is her male romance. It's kind of a small town situation where we have a guy from the big city comes to the small town, falls for a guy in the small town. Once again, kind of same as Finding Joy. It's just I've read a lot of male romances, and this one I honestly remember just about nothing about. I feel like with Talia Hibbert's other books, I have fond memories of them, or at the very least I remember more what happened in them. And this one, it's just like a blank slate. I remember absolutely nothing. So I'm gonna go ahead and pass it on, even though I really do love this cover. But I'm sure someone else will fall in love with it and maybe find it a bit more memorable than I did. The next book is similar to the situation that had me keeping My Life as Emperor, and that is going to be The House of Gentlemen by Kathy Heppenstall. This is a book that I read many years before I started my YouTube journey, and it just had like a huge impact on me because it was kind of a literary fiction slash taboo romance, which is something that I had never read at the time of reading the story. Since then, I have read more things like that and just have no desire to return to this story once again, so we will go ahead and pass it on. Up next, we have the one nonfiction that I have read that I'm getting rid of, and that is going to be Conquest by Andrea Smith. Now, this is a book that I really did quite enjoy. I read it for school, hence why it has so many tabs in it, but I've kind of hesitated to get rid of it, even though I feel like I don't want it on my shelves anymore, because Andrea Smith is one of those authors who made the idiotic decision of letting people believe she was part of the Indigenous community when she is not. So this was something that our professor found out like in the middle of us reading this book. So I didn't really want to like put it out there and have people think that they were picking up a book that talked about sexual violence and the American Indian genocide from the point of view of an actual Indigenous person, when that is in fact not the case. A well-written and well-researched story, but all of that work kind of gets thrown out the window when you realize that the author has profited off of lying about her ethnicity, so that is very disappointing. I will probably put this in a free little library with like a big like warning, like like a sticky tab that says, hey, just so you know, this book is not written by an Indigenous person, and if you want to find more information on these topics from an actual Indigenous person, you will need to look elsewhere for that. Up next on this list, we have King of Immortaltis by Ben Alderson. I have the other two books in this series over here. These are essentially standalones, so it's absolutely no problem for me to be getting rid of what is essentially book 2 in this series if I ever need to reread it. I won't be missing out if I skip over this one. This one was my least favorite. The first book was kind of a Beauty and the Beast retelling featuring vampires. The third one was kind of a Red Riding Hood one featuring werewolves. I think it was just werewolves. I'm not sure if there was witches in that one. There might be witches in that one, but I can't remember. And this one was fae based, and the inspiration was Hades and Persephone. I have not had a lot of luck with fae stories. They're not really my jam, to be honest. They're pretty popular here in the reading community, but I have yet to really find one that I connect to other than Laura Thalas's Rhapsodic. But this one just left me rather disappointed compared to the other stories. I'm also not a big Hades and Persephone girly. Been there, done that, don't need to do it again, but it's a popular trope, so I'm sure I'll come across it again. But yes, I will be sending this book on its way. Up next, we have My Sister, the Serial Killer. This is by Oyinka Brathwaite. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, because I definitely did. This was a book that I had a decent time with. The most memorable part of the story is the ending. I definitely approve of the way the author decided to end the story. The rest of it was meh, to be honest, so I don't foresee myself putting this up in any recommendation videos or rereading it. So we will go ahead and pass it on. Up next, we have a couple books that I have DNF'd recently. The first of them being The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren. This is just your everyday contemporary romance, a kind of enemies to lovers situation. Everyone at the wedding gets food poisoning, and so these two have to go together, and it was boring. So there's that. Up next, we have A Sinner by Sierra Simone. This is the second book in the Priest series. I had a terrible time with this. I hated being in this man's head. He was a horny little bastard. And I said, farewell, sir. I do not want to be in your head for another sentence. And our second to last book, we have Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. I do have plans to continue this series, but I will do so via audiobook, so there's not really any reason for me to keep this book on my shelf. I did think it was a sweet story. I had a good time with it. It's kind of, I guess this one is kind of fae based, though I feel like the fae are kind of more background characters. I did enjoy the autistic characteristics that were present in our character, and I thought that the romance was well paced, and also enjoyed the themes of helping those in poverty. And finally, we have a book that I am getting rid of because I have duplicate copies, and that is going to be Cersei by Madeline Miller. I don't know if you can see it. Nope, it's on a shelf that's too low for you to see, but I have the UK hardback version, which is obviously prettier. I mean, they're both pretty, but I just don't love this story enough for me to have a need to keep both of them on my shelf. I definitely am a Song of Achilles, a girly. That one I enjoy a lot more than this one, but this was still a really great time, but I just don't feel like I need 2 copies of it on my shelf. All right, guys, so those are all the books that I am unhauling. It feels good to know that I can get these out of my house, though it'll probably be a few weeks, if not a few months, till they are actually all gone. I still have some books under my bed from last year's unhaul. I will probably go ahead and put them on my, what's it called? Pango for a few months, and then maybe take a trip to half-priced books for those that I'm not putting in free little libraries. My Pango account is not available to the public just because I don't have a PO box, so I don't feel comfortable with sharing my private address, just because I am present here on the internet. Better safe than sorry. With that being said, I would love to know how you do your unhauls. Do you kind of keep all your books on your shelf no matter if you like them or not? Do you unhaul as you go? Do you do one every quarter, every half year, like me, once a year? And if so, where is your favorite place to distribute your books? Value Village, half price books, free little libraries, your local library, Pango Books, Facebook Marketplace. There are tons of places to go ahead and send your book to their next owner. But as always, guys, thank you so much for supporting my channel by watching my videos, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!